Today, it is the dual full pull that gets the demo treatment. When you see a rack with Verbos modules, I think you're more likely to see a voltage multistage, a complex oscillator, or maybe the newer amp and tone, for example, sometimes a delay, but you don't see the dual full pull that often. I may go as far as saying as the dual full pull may be the black sheep of the Verbos family. You really don't see it often in the racks of people. I guess most people are infuriated by the fact that it's 21 HP. Why add 1 HP to that module, please? It's indeed quite big, but when you see these knobs, you quickly realize that a filter should have big knobs. There's really no point in having a filter with a tiny shaft. So this is purely a joy to use. When I got that filter, it took me a really long time to really love it. By a long time, I mean like a year and a half or something. Sometimes it was my rack, sometimes it was out of the rack. I tried a few filters in the meantime, namely the filter 8, but I couldn't bring myself to selling it. It has an undeniable je ne sais quoi that I couldn't sell it, so I kept it, even if it was in a drawer for some time. But as you can see, all the filters have been sold and this one came back, despite its 21 odd HP. And while I was hunting for filters, I always remember that, yeah, it's nice, but it's just a low pass, even if it has 5 outputs at the same time. I really like the fact that the high pass is cascading into the low pass and that they each have their own out. And then some dual filters have that, but I wasn't really interested in like a proper big dual filter. That's all the rage at the moment because way too many knobs and I don't know, it seems unnecessarily complicated. In the end, when you look closely about the dual full pull, it has quite a few features that I haven't been able to find in any other filter, namely the 2 CV inputs for each filter. It's so useful with an attenuverter. I'm not talking about the vol per octave input most filters have, because it's annoying to use an attenuator. This one has 2 CV inputs with attenuverters, an attenuator on the resonance input, and big frequency knobs. The high pass is cascading into the low pass, which I find really useful. In the end, it's quite a unique filter. It definitely has plenty of defects. It's far from perfect, but really it's by design. It takes its inspiration from the very, very earliest filters from the 60s. So of course it doesn't track very well and doesn't self-oscillate, but it has a charm and something. This wouldn't be a proper filter demo if I wasn't starting with filter sweeps of a saw wave. So we're gonna do exactly that. I like to pair dual full pull with the dual sine sawtooth generator by Red Panel, because they all come from this early 60s electronics and they embrace their wild imperfections. As you may know or not, or you may even not care, I like to organize my modular into chunks of voices. So we have the complex oscillator voice on the top row, then this one with the 158, and there's the DPO voice, and all the lower rows are CV generation. This is my 158 60s inspired wild FM voice. Let's just start for now with a saw wave through the low pass side. Here's the saw wave. So here's a basic filter sweep with no resonance. So if you're like me, you might find this a bit underwhelming. And basically what it does is mostly just lower the sound. As you can hear, or not hear in that case, there's nothing that happens before the 11 o'clock point, where the sound comes back. You might see this as a big defect, but it's actually a strength because it makes a great low pass gate. If we are completely honest, when you hear, the sound isn't really silent. There's a big DC offset that you need to get rid of. So if you're mixing in the modular, I advise you to use a small 2 HP high pass module And if you're mixing in a box, just slap a EQ on there and just cut the lows. So let's hear the low pass with a bit of resonance now, and it gets, of course, much more interesting. More resonance. Really peaks harmonics nicely. You can hear the sharp cutoff at around the 10, 30, 11 point. And it doesn't self-oscillate, so here's the sound with resonance at the maximum. It's on the brink of self-oscillation, but you won't get a clean sine wave out of this. Another funny thing about this filter, which most people will also consider as a defect, is how much low frequency the resonance removes. So I know the Moog filters does that as well, but here it's a bit different. There's not just that the resonance removes the low frequency, but there's a huge slew before the bass content comes back. Listen to this. It takes a full 2 or 3 seconds for really the resonance to die down. But once again, if you notice when you get that filter, you can really use it to your advantage. Let's listen to the high side now. There's something to be said about a low saw wave into a high pass. Just immediately sounds cosmic. More resonance. The resonance here are the same behavior as the low pass side. So let's hear it. But I guess it's a bit faster. And of course, since the high pass normals into the low pass, I'm just here into the high pass input, but you can use those as serial filters like I'm doing here, and just when you have a band pass. And you can tailor your CV to have a band pass with the attenuators here, or you can use it in parallel since they both have outputs and inputs, of course, or you can use them as two separate filters, which is also nice. After all, it's 21 HP, so it's nice to have two filters in so much panel space. So that's it for the filter sweeps. I think you'll agree with me that 5 minutes of this is plenty. Now we'll get to the sequencing and see what this filter has inside. Okay, so for this first patch, I guess I'll just walk you through my super typical use of the dual full pool as either a filter or a low pass gate, or maybe a hybrid between the two. Usually I would have the dual full pool run into the amplitude and tone controller as an additional filter VCA, but it wouldn't be suited for demo because I guess the amplitude and tone controller would cloud the sound. So I'm going through a VCA, just a clean basic VCA, the Vermuna quadruple, and then straight into the scan and pan mixer, and then straight into my computer for recording purposes. As stated in the intro, I'm going to use dual sine sawtooth generator model 158, and I'm going to be sequencing all this with a voltage multistage. So let's just flick some switch, move some sliders around, and try to find a sequence that works. So our oscillator is in full sine wave, so maybe not the best waveform choice for a filter. Let's find something that has more harmonics. Something hybrid. We can also maybe add some FM to add some harmonics, or even cross modulation to add a bit of craziness, but not too much. Let's say we are happy with this. Let's add some slew on the CV and maybe a touch of reverb and delay, which are H9 and Al Capistan. So I have my multi-envelope opening my quadruple, but it's doing nothing to the filter. So usually I would start with this, but then I would try closing the filter completely and use a separate envelope to move the filter and see if it works better that way. It usually makes the sound much shorter and plucky, which I like. But as you can see, as soon as you turn off the resonance, the low frequency completely disappears. So since I tend to use my dual sine sawtooth generator as a baseline module, it's not really ideal. But it can come really handy when once you have your baseline cared for, then you pretty much can use this as an EQ and remove the bass and have some nice resonance on top. There's always something nice to find between the CV inputs and the low pass main knob. Let's just add a touch more delay. And since the voltage multistage has so many options of modulation, let's add some more modulation to this filter. Because I don't know about you, but I almost always want to use an envelope and something else. So I find these two to be so useful, and sometimes I even use the control voltage processor to mix and match voltages before, but it's a luxury to have these two on the panel. And I couldn't deal with the other filters, which had only one after this. Let's take a much more extreme sound. So here I've run the oscillator in the dual sine sawtooth generator that I use for FMing the other oscillator to add some Audiorate modulation to the resonance, and I think it sounds pretty good. That gives us a funny little minimal groove. I think it's a subtle, but at the same time, super powerful filter. I'm just using the dual full pull low pass side here, because when you're using it as the main sound, you kind of have to keep the low frequencies. Even though the high pass sounds super good. Stops us from using this in parallel instead of serial. So let's use the high pass to make another sound. Here I've patched the high pass side into the multi-delay processor, just sending one gate to the second envelope of my multi-envelope, and an LFO to the high pass side, as well as some CV from the voltage multistage to just move the high pass side around to derive something more ambient or atmospheric from our first bassline. Once again, the technique of getting as much as possible as just one sound. Then since you're into the multi-delay, nothing stops you from starting crazy feedback routes. The high pass side can be also super interesting into the feedback path of a delay, a crazy feedback into whatever feedback enable module you have. all in all, that's pretty much how I would go to start a track or have fun on my modular. Basically, these days I really love starting stuff with the dual sign, dual full pull combo. They not only share a first word in a name, they share a philosophy, they share the fun factor, and they share the crazy, weird rawness to the sound. There's nothing, absolutely nothing perfect about them, and that's why I like them. So on to the next patch with the dual full pull. One thing I think the dual full pull does really nicely is ping. Despite the fact that it doesn't resonate, the resonance is high enough that if you send it a gate or strong CV, you can get nice, very nice pings out of it. I discovered this by mistake, sort of. While I was trying to make a track, I was sending modulation from the voltage multistage to the CV inputs fully opened, and the 10 volts from the voltage multistage were so strong that it pinged my filter, because probably my resonance was way up. And when I heard that, I just removed the input and just used the pings, because pings sound beautiful. So what we're doing here is exactly this, sending a mixture of voltages and gates to the low pass side. For a reason that I can't explain, the high pass side doesn't really ping that well, so we're just going to use the low pass side. First of all, let's patch the gate output to the CV input and pick a couple. Here's the first ping. It's kind of short, but I like it. And then we can patch the CVB row to the other and just start moving the sliders. And the nice thing is the CV gives this sort of velocity to your pings, because the gates are full strength. But the CV just moves this around, so you get different tones. From very low to very high. And even if the dry sound sounds super nice, it's worth adding subtle effects to really make it even nicer. Like a short reverb, for example. Or even a touch of delay. With panning. I don't know about you, but I really, really love these kinds of sounds. Let's see if we can try to audiorate this as well as sending gates. We'll have to use a mixer beforehand though. Sounds like some sort of Iranian guitar instrument. The nice thing with something like the control voltage processor is that you can choose the strength of your gates. If you use, for example, the crossfader and a random signal, the strength is never going to be the same, and of course the pings react to that. To completely remove the tone, we need to use an envelope. So that's one ping example. Of course, you can just then incorporate that into a track or layer several tracks of pinging if that's really your jam. In any way you take it, that's a great sound. Let's have a little Buchla Bongo interlude if you'd like. We saw in the previous example that you could use the low pass side as a pretty convincing low pass gate, but I want to dedicate this very little segment to that. So we're going to use the red panel module in FM into the low pass side, and contrary to say the LXD where you can just strike the module with a gate, with the dual full pole it's useful to have something like an exponential envelope. Something like function works really well. So we're going to send the envelope to the CV inputs and listen to the results, and you can see and hear that we will get some pretty convincing Buchla Bongo tones. This is with the CV input fully open, and I think it's a bit too much here. In order to get these rather dark sounds, but still woody, I think it's better to back off on the CV inputs. But then you can also have different responses of the envelope, something more logarithmic. But honestly, I much prefer something that's exponential. You can increase the resonance then to your liking. I'm using the CVB row of voltage multistage to increase the full time of function, to get some more expressivity out of these bongos. Can be very nice and tight. Once again, it sounds pretty good with a small reverb. Let's have fun now with some Audiorate modulation of the dual 4-pool. We can start with a somewhat dull sound, something like this. So here's the sound if we open the filters completely. It's a bit more harmonics heavy. Let's close the filters a bit. And we're going to apply some Audiorate modulation first from the DPO into the low pass side. Has this sort of bizarre instability. Then we can do the same thing with the high pass side, still with a sine wave. This is starting to be rather industrial sounding. And when we can have some more classic modulation from looping envelopes, such as Coin Tool 1. And function. Which we can modulate. With random.